Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Zach Meckler.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and today I guess you're a brother from another mother, but it's not my usual brother from another mother, the host who doesn't like toast or can't eat anything that's bread, apparently. But I am joined instead today by the professor of football, A1, Mr. Zach Meckler. Zach, how's it going?
Not too bad, not to make Brian upset, but I actually had toast for breakfast this morning, so he's going to be quite disappointed in me at this point.
You know, I'm going to get the toast soon enough here. I'm a little behind on it. I did get my coffee. He despises coffee too. You know what? He would not be, although he is quite the character. Maybe he'd be more a Kramer if he were on Seinfeld, but I don't see him fitting into the Moe's Cafe type thing there. Like, what would he order? You know what I mean? All bets are off there. We've got football coming up again on Sunday. The Seattle Seahawks traveling to face the Pittsburgh Steelers at Heinz Field. Steelers home opener here for week 2. 1 o'clock kickoff. Of course, that's the usual, hey, the West Coast team is traveling over, this type of thing. Always disruptive. Actually, what was kind of interesting, Zach, is, my hometown of Youngstown, Ohio. It's the weirdest thing. If you drive through a certain area there, Denise York DeBartolo, I don't know if she's technically owner or she's like, a chairman or something of that nature or whatever. Also the hometown, obviously, Eddie DeBartolo, Hall of Famer and stuff like that. So you'll see a big 49ers logo on the side of a building there, and that's actually where they're at this week because they're going to Cincinnati. So instead of like traversing, in the middle of the week or on the weekend, they're staying put, and they do this actually often, not all the time, but often. Maybe once a year, twice a year. So then it cuts their trip in half and their body's adjusted to, Eastern time zone and things of that nature. I didn't see anything like that with the Seahawks, but I thought that was an interesting tidbit for anybody who's, they're talking about, hey, you know what, this is a West Coast team traveling or whatever and playing an early game. Well, the 49ers are they're away from home and it's not like their usual, surroundings, but, this is the stuff that teams do to try and hedge their bets on that type of stuff. But usually that's an advantage for the team playing at home, the Eastern time zone team, such as the Steelers here. And we've seen in years past, the Seahawks, sometimes they're sloppy too in September, even though Pete Carroll's a great coach. They got lots of talented players. Obviously, maybe my favorite player that's not a Steeler playing in the NFL right now, Russell Wilson. I've said it here before. He exhibits a lot of the same type of skills or leadership that Ben Roethlisberger has. So, you can never really count them out. But at the same time, we go back and we look at what just happened last week, and we just said this off the air, and I don't want to steal your thunder because it's definitely your quote, so I'll let you say it yourself. But I don't know what's going on because the Bengals Andy Dalton had a career day, and the Seahawks allowed him to throw the ball all over the field. In fact, I had it up, and of course, I always lose things, man. It's driving me crazy. It's my old age, man. Okay, so why can't I think of his name? Mixon. He got hurt in the game, and I think it got more pass-heavy because Dalton attempted 51 passes, threw for 418 yards and 2 touchdowns, a 106.5 quarterback rating against the Seahawks on the road in Seattle in that loud stadium. And, the Seahawks basically, they were on the ropes there for part of this game, and they were actually down 17-14 going into the fourth quarter, ended up coming back, and they win the game 21-20. So I'll let you say it because I don't want to steal your thunder, but what the heck happened in week 1 here? We're going to talk about the Steelers here in a second in the same vein, but what's it look like on the surface here with the Bengals and Seahawks? What can we take from that game?
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways to look at this. Either one, this Bengals team is much better than anyone ever gave them credit for this offseason, and Zach Taylor is actually the real deal as a head coach. It's obviously week 1, so can't take anything for granted. But, this is a Seattle Seahawks team that's been considered amongst the top 10 teams in the league now for the better part of the last decade. And to see them go out there and they're a run-first team, but that defense has always been what's made them who they are. And to see Andy Dalton, of all quarterbacks, who going into this year, everyone's saying this is his make-or-break year. Depending on how he does is going to depend on whether or not Zach Taylor tries to pull the trigger on a quarterback early in the draft next year. You throw for 418 yards on the road against Seattle week 1 and almost pull off what's considered to be the upset win. That's pretty impressive to me. And I'm not sure if that's more the Bengals coming out there or just more indicative of the fact that the Seahawks are going to be a team that's going to try to control the clock this year and try to just pound it out and hunker down on defense. But 418 yards, that's not really hunkering down. That's some air assault. That's something air raid Big 12 type of offensive production you see there. So I don't know. I mean, either the Bengals should be not taken for granted this year because they had a good game all around, or the Seahawks are just not as strong on defense. And I think there are a lot of question marks, which I know we're going to get to, especially in that secondary, which should hopefully bode well for the Steelers. And maybe that's why Andy Dalton was able to find some cohesion there with John Ross for the first time in 3 years and Tyler Boyd. But I'm just I was stunned. I did not expect it to be that result. I think that was kind of the theme for a lot of games in week 1.
I'm telling you, there was the Steelers. Obviously, they're going to be looking at that film and looking at their own film. It's funny how we try to read into so much stuff from week 1 because I already want to dance around and feel vindicated on a few things. I said, hey, the Bengals maybe talented. The Browns, don't crown them the Super Bowl champions already. But it's 1 week because I also thought the Steelers were going to play a heck of a lot better than they did at New England. And there isn't one thing that I think anybody could predict in that game correctly, at least on the Steelers side of the ball, because they did absolutely squat. So, but, looking back at history here, we've got so much news and so many things going on this week to cover. It's kind of crazy, but I wanted to rewind, and we brought this up, not to panic, right? It's where do I even start with this? Because everybody's on Dante Moncrief. Finally, somebody gave some validation too. Jeremy Fowler. Finally, somebody, and I guess straight from the horse's mouth from Dante Moncrief, still working with the dislocated fingers. I don't understand why this hasn't surfaced anywhere. You and I were sitting there all the way back at Friday Night Lights looking at this, and we're like, hey, he's doing these drills just trying to catch the ball with one hand. I wish he wasn't in the drills at all with that, because I think that screws you up even more, especially if he's dealing with any, discomfort or soreness or anything like that. And, of course, Ben targets him like 10 times, the most targeted guy in the game. And there's a lot of parallels when you go back. We talked about a lot. Steelers needing to establish the running game, or at least get the running back involved. 20 touches, however those touches may be, because, of course, Randy Fichtner views a short pass the same as a run, which he's not necessarily wrong in that instance. That's their offensive philosophy the way it is now under a new OC. Well, rather new OC, second-year OC. A little different than Todd Haley, right? Or was it? Even all the way back when. We went back to 2016, and we were talking about not the panic, and there was a lot of parallels with the game that occurred in Week 3 against the Philadelphia Eagles at Philadelphia. Steelers were actually 2-0 at that point. If you remember, they beat the Redskins in Washington Monday Night Football, and then they turned around and then they beat the Bengals, and then they go into Philadelphia, a place like they never win or never won on the road since Shep was a pup or whatever. And it was like their worst loss in franchise history, basically, or like since the 70s, 60s, whatever it was.
Ben era, yeah.
Yeah, it was like a really bad 34-3 loss. There was only like one drive that was really redeemable, that was like 60-some yards or whatever. And when you're in that specific game there, you have Ben Roethlisberger has a 62.4 QB rating. He was picked once. He was sacked 4 times. No touchdowns, obviously, with the score. They get torched by short passes with Carson Wentz. Darren Sproles was all over the place, if you remember that correctly, too. And then D'Angelo Williams was the running back because Lev Bell was suspended, and he only he carried the ball 8 times for 21 yards. And we went all the way, if you go all the way back then, and he caught like 4 passes for 23 also. You go all the way back when we were saying the same thing. Hey, D'Angelo Williams was just like the AFC Player of the Week, maybe against the Bengals, like just the week before or something. Because I remember him being a fantasy stud, and everyone was talking about the Steelers' offense. And then they laid this egg where offense and defense weren't in sync whatsoever during that game. And I know you're going to talk a little bit about the parallels too, but I just wanted to point out on the website I have a play that I put up, and I brought this up because of the obvious Throwback Thursday thing that we do over on SteelCityUnderground.com. And I wanted to show this just because of the game that happened after that bad loss. And that would be the Kansas City Chiefs coming into town. It was a primetime game. Nobody was giving the Steelers any credit. They come out and just put the boots to Kansas City 43-14, including this one big touchdown pass where Ben connects with Marcus Wheaton, who lo and behold had a bunch of drops against the Eagles a week earlier, and kind of redeemed himself there with one big play, and also wears the same uniform number as Dante Moncrief too. And the same thing being, they got back to establishing the running game. Le'Veon Bell, he was 18 carries for 144 yards. He caught the ball 5 times for 34. So he exceeded 20 touches, and they were just way, way better. And Ben was nearly perfect in that game too against the Chiefs. He had 5 touchdown passes, 152.5 QB rating when they played the Chiefs, and nobody was expecting that. And I'm being cautiously optimistic here because it's still week 2, Zach, but I see a lot of the same things where the Steelers have bounce-back games. They play bad on the road, and then all of a sudden they come home and they just shellac the team that comes in.
Yeah, I mean, it's early, and I understand fans being disgruntled with the result of the game. It was a very ugly game. I mean, fortunately, I had some other assignments going on that I didn't have to dedicate my full undivided attention to the shellacking that took place, especially in the second half. But I saw too many similarities between this game against New England and the game against the Eagles. I remember feeling after the Eagles game this just pit of disgust watching them play, because it was a young Carson Wentz. It wasn't like he was the MVP caliber quarterback we had seen at that point. So seeing them come in there with that type of performance and just laying a duck. The defense did the same thing. They had no sacks. Artie Burns was the only defensive back to even come close to putting a hand on the ball during that game. No interceptions, no forced fumbles. They absolutely just could not lock down anything that the Eagles were doing. I mean, that game alone, you had an individual that some of you might have heard of, Darren Sproles, one of the original scat backs in the league that everyone's always gone to as the stereotypical pass-catching running back, had 6 receptions for 128 yards, which is very reminiscent to what James White has routinely done against NFL teams, specifically the Steelers. And then you look at the offense, like you said, they couldn't get anything going through the air. Ben had 257 passing yards. Most of those came in garbage time, trying to get something going, and nothing came of that. And they had no ground game. The offensive line couldn't do anything. I mean, Ben was sacked 4 times in that game. I think there's too many similarities to start jumping out of the ship now. I think this is a lot of not even just the Steelers' problems, but you see a lot of teams in the league never really get their identity early on in the season due to the fact that a lot of their starters, and mainly their quarterbacks, don't play in the preseason. And fans have their opinions on this. I know a lot of fans wish Ben would play more. A lot of them don't want him to get hurt in a meaningless game. But I think there is some rust that needs to get knocked off by a lot of these teams. And the Steelers, unfortunately, always seem to have this first quarter of the season be this very rough patch where they struggle getting their traction going, and they end up getting shellacked by someone early on in the season. And I think this was the Patriots this year, and then against the Eagles in 2016, it was that game. And I just think there's too much talent on this roster, whether it's proven or not proven. There's too much talent, too much potential that has the ability to come to fruition that I'm not going to jump ship on them. When we've seen this in the past where they have a nice bounce back game against a very competent opponent. I mean, the 2016 Chiefs went 12-4. I mean, they won. I think they only lost 2 games over the last span of the remaining 12 weeks of the season after they lost to the Steelers. I mean, it was a very good year for them. Very potent offense. It wasn't Pat Mahomes, obviously, but they were a very competent, very efficient, very good team. The Steelers put a walloping on them. And I think the Seahawks had the same type of pedigree. A run-first team, pretty decent defense, very potent run game when they want to get it going. I think the Steelers have a good opportunity to bounce back and show that it's so hard to gauge where these teams actually are week 1 of the season. I mean, there's going to be teams that dominated this past week that are not even a factor by the time week 15, 16, and 17 rolls around. And there's teams right now that are struggling that may or may not be in the playoff contention or maybe making run a Super Bowl by the time this is all said and done. So, I think realistically there's a lot of that still has to happen, and this is a very good opportunity against a very good Seahawks team to kind of rectify that loss against the Patriots last week, very similarly to the way the Steelers did against the Chiefs after they lost to the Eagles in 2016.
And that's the reason I say I'm cautiously optimistic too, because, you're talking about like where they have like one of these games. Well, last year they had like more than one of these games. I mean, the game that started in Cleveland in week 1 was just ugly for so many reasons, and weather contributed to that factor as well as extension of the preseason. They came home and nobody really knew what Patrick Mahomes and, the Chiefs offense was going to be yet in week 2 of the season. And they just came out of shot out of a cannon, 21-0. But the Steelers ended up tying that at halftime miraculously too. So they were at least competitive in the game, even though it was maybe not as competitive the second half. I mean, it was pretty much, they got some garbage time points to make it seem a little closer with 42-37. But I mean, they were behind from the get-go, and they never did get to establish that run against the Chiefs. And then the Buccaneers game where they held on, they went down to Tampa Bay, and then they laid another egg, a real stinker against the Ravens on Sunday night last year before the Falcons came in. Then it was week 5 when they finally, pieced it all together and blew the Falcons out 41-17. And they had a very similar performance later on against in the season on Thursday Night Football against the Carolina Panthers. So it's which Steelers team is going to show up? Well, we'll talk about that shortly, because you know what? There's a huge injury report, and plus there's some, a few changes and stuff I think we should talk about too as we get to the Seahawks stuff. But let's talk about the changes first. What do you think about the Josh Dobbs trade? I thought the Steelers got a good value there, a 5th-round pick. The Jaguars, assuming that Nick Foles doesn't return, even if he does, when's he going to return? Right? They may be in the doldrums by then, so it might be a high 5th-round pick, whereas Dobbs was a lower 4th-round pick. So you knew what Dobbs was, you knew what Devlin Hodges was. You brought Duck back, you predicted it. You said you just guessed, but hey, I'll give you credit. You predicted it, him going to the practice squad. But I know some other people are a little upset about losing Tazar Skipper. And it was it's one of those things where you gamble, you risk whether or not a team would actually pick him up, because they had to pick him up to their 53-man roster in order to claim him off of waivers. And that's what you're kind of gambling is that a team, or who's on the bottom of the roster on some of these teams, and are they in need of this position or this position? And I know there's going to be a lot of flack on that because the move was made in order to bring Johnny Holton up. Johnny Holton plays 8 snaps against the Patriots. And, was it worth doing that? Well, Johnny Holton's he's something that the Steelers don't really have. He's a DHB type mold player, tall and fast and everything like that. And that's kind of funny because as I look back at that Chiefs game, that was the blowout, the other blowout, the one in 2016 following the Eagles game, not the one from last year. Darius Hayward-Bay was the first guy to catch a touchdown pass in that game, like a 33-yarder or something of that nature. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Holton may still have a role, whereas maybe Skipper may not have ever had a role based on being basically the 5th outside linebacker. Now, there's some injuries and stuff that play into that, but just some thoughts on that. I mean, the Steelers aren't a team that we don't usually see them roll with only 2 quarterbacks, but I think Duck Hodges is a capable third that's there. I think everyone kind of agreed on it. I always thought, hey, the jury's out on this guy unless they make a move because of what they invested in both Rudolph and Dobbs. Now they got a little bit of that investment back, and I think everybody's cool with it.
Yeah, the fact that I saw any fans that were upset, which was a surprising amount of them, not that the Steelers traded away Dobbs, but the fact they only got a 5th. I'm using the word only in quotes. This was a guy who was a 4th-round draft pick who his career stats are 6 completions on 12 attempts, 43 yards, 0 touchdowns, and an interception. I mean, what do you want, a 1st-round pick for this guy? I mean, I love Dobbs. Yeah. Dobbs was my favorite quarterback from that draft class, and I was excited whenever the Steelers drafted him. But they get a 5th-round return on a guy who was your number 3 quarterback, has yet to prove anything in the NFL, and has been up and down in the preseason at that. I mean, he had a very good 2018 preseason, beat out Landry Jones and Mason Rudolph for the number 2. But this isn't a high pedigree player. It's not like he's a former 1st rounder like Josh Rosen or, and then there's been some other moves around like the AJ McCarron trades and whatnot. But AJ McCarron at that point had playoff starts. He had some consistency doing some good things in the NFL. Josh Dobbs has none of that. And I hope nothing but the best for him. But a 5th-round return, I think, is a win for the Jaguars because they desperately needed some quarterback in the NFL who has had some experience to back up their rookie. And the Steelers get a 5th-round return, which, like as you mentioned, is going to be a potentially very early 5th-round pick if the Jaguars do not do anything with Gardner Minshew, if Nick Foles does, in fact, miss the entire season like I think he's probably going to end up doing. So you have a very good return on that. And then you have Devlin Hodges, who is a fan favorite this preseason, who has a lot of growth to do, but I think right now has a little bit more arm talent than Josh Dobbs. I don't think he's as good of a quarterback necessarily right now, but he has the arm talent to turn into something. Put him on the practice squad. He's going to get looks. He's going to run the scout team stuff. I think you have the opportunity for a guy who's going to come in there and maybe make the roster next year as as the 3rd quarterback, and gives you an opportunity to have a high pedigree backup to hopefully be the heir apparent to Ben Roethlisberger, and a guy who can develop as your hopeful long-term backup. I mean, I think that's a very good situation while getting a 5th-round pick out of it, because at this point, if Mason Rudolph grabs onto that number 2 and never looks back, which I don't think he's going to, Dobbs was never going to be in the picture for anything. And if in a situation where Ben goes down in a game, the number 3 quarterback's inactive anyway. So it wasn't as if Dobbs was going to come off the bench and save the day at that point in time. You're still only rolling with 1 quarterback. I think we've just become so enamored with the idea that Steelers always keep 3 quarterbacks, which they're one of the few teams in the league that still does that. I think I'd rather have them have someone else on the roster that could potentially contribute in some capacity on special teams or something like that than just being an automatic write-off as an inactive player on game days. But I'm disappointed in losing Tazar Skipper as well. But that's a gamble. Teams make those gambles all the time where they let a player go in the hopes he clears waivers, they can re-sign him. And I think that was the ultimate goal for them, was to put him on the practice squad. Once Dobbs was gone, bring him back instead of Jerome Elliott. And I think that's, Elliott's not a bad player. He's a veteran player with experience, and he's had some success in the league. But Skipper was the darling. He was the Steelers training camp darling this year, preseason darling, who came out there. He led the league in sacks in the preseason. Looked like he had the pedigree to be a very efficient pass rusher, but we still have no idea who he is. And right now, even if he would have made the 53-man roster, the odds of him playing on Sundays were slim to none, just because of the fact that they're not going to take Bud or TJ Watt off the field. And right now, for whatever reason, the team is still so enamored with Anthony Chickillo being a very key reserve role. And once Ola comes back full strength and is able to participate, you have a guy that's going to be the 5th outside linebacker. And I think long-term, he'd be a very good player. But the odds of his impact, especially early in 2019, being anything worthwhile would be probably slim to none, in my opinion. That's just the realism of the entire situation. But I'm disappointed to see him go. But I think snagging Hodges back before he was able to go and try out with the Jets, which is where he's going. And now with the news that Sam Darnold's not going to be playing, it would have been a very big move for them to get a guy like Devlin Hodges. So it works out for the Steelers. But I think Elliott will be serviceable enough in that capacity where he'll be the 5th outside linebacker to probably contribute on special teams. And it wasn't like he had a bad preseason. I mean, he made some splash plays. I don't think he has the long-term upside. He's already at that age where he's pretty much reached his ceiling. But it's a risk you take in the NFL, and fans are going to be upset about that. I was pretty bummed that Skipper got signed, but in the league where teams are constantly trying to better their rosters, you make gambles in the hopes that guys clear, and one scouting department, one GM falls in love with what he saw on the tape from a player, and he snags and pulls the trigger on him for a low-risk investment. And that's essentially what Skipper's going to be with the Giants, and I hope him all the best up in New York.
Yeah, and it's definitely the not-for-long league, because if Skipper, he might show some stuff in practice, but is he showing enough to where you think you got to look into the future? What are the Steelers going to do? Are they going to try and bring Dupree back next year? You got to look at the future. Are they just going to draft somebody else? Are they going to draft 2 someone else's and it just bumps them off the roster anyway? So it's like, what are you really losing for this season? Barring serious injury where these players come in and play, it's the only way you would really know what you have from him, because you're not going to sit Dupree. You're not going to sit or intentionally sit Dupree or Watt, and they're not doing this rotation garbage like they used to do with like 4 outside linebackers. That's long gone, and that was just that really only existed to cover some of the shortcomings of like Jarvis Jones or, Bud Dupree being young and inexperienced, a rookie, or coming off an injury and working his way back in on the roster. So that went bye-bye once TJ was drafted. And that's the reason James Harrison got PO'd and left town. So not everybody that's undrafted ends up becoming James Harrison. It doesn't work that way. That's why players, 32 teams said, we're not going to draft this guy. You know what I mean? It is a very much so a long shot. And it's not to, poo-poo on Skipper or what I think his ability or talent is. It's just, it's an uphill battle. The odds are not in his favor. It's like the Hunger Games, right? May the odds forever be in your favor. So, I mean, and it really is, man. I mean, it's dog eat dog, every man for themselves. I mean, years ago, I'm trying to think who it was now. Oh, who was it that was on there? I'm thinking I'm going to have to go back to it, but it was one of the outside linebackers right before Joey Porter, and his name is just escaped me. But he was talking about, he was a 7th round pick, and now they draft Joey, and it's like, do you show him the ropes, or do you keep all the secrets to yourself and try and maintain a job? And there's so many things that, jostling for position and stuff like that end up happening. So, but just, the reason we're bringing all this type of stuff up too is, like you said, some people are going to read into whether or not they like the Josh Dobbs move or not. Dobbs as the third guy, they don't have everybody active on the 53 even for game day. How many are there, Zach? Now I'm drawing a blank too. 46?
46 or 45, yeah.
Yeah, so there's 7 or 8 players that are inactive on game day. That means they cannot participate in the game whatsoever, and it's usually one of the reserve linemen. It's usually the third quarter. Oh, it's always the third quarterback. It was Rudolph. I don't know that Rudolph was active all of last season for one game. Not one game. So that's what they mean by getting a helmet, and that was going to be Dobbs. So I mean, he's not going to participate anyways. He's kind of, he's taking a roster space. They're getting compensation for it. So, we had to take a pause and do that and talk about that, and some of that is going to factor in now because people are going to be concerned about this injury report. We've already mentioned some names. T.J. Watt limited with a hip. He was standing on the sidelines at the end of the game. He was ruled out of the Patriots game and then was standing on the sidelines. So I don't think you're standing on the sidelines if you're seriously damaged or hurt. You know what I mean? I think you're at least...
Watt.
Yeah, Watt was standing right next to Mike Tomlin on the sidelines, very visible during the game. So in the fourth quarter, so I don't think I was just talking about my own hip ailments, right, Zach? I would not want to be standing there by the coach with the hurt hip. So I mean, he's limited. They're gonna have the kid gloves on him. I may as well go in reverse order of what I got here. Zach Banner, illness. I hope illness does not spread. Isn't there one of these teams now has like strep throat going around the locker room? And you just mentioned Sam Darnold is going to be out now, maybe even like a couple of weeks. So the Browns luck out on Monday Night Football. He's got mono. It's like I hope the bug isn't going around. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The surprise one, nobody knew. Roosevelt Nix. We were trying to figure out, and I'm gonna. The reason I want to stop here on Nix, we're trying to figure out why didn't they go big? You know what I mean? And he said Roosevelt Nix got hurt, and then we're like, well, wait a second. He played 18 special team snaps. When did he get hurt? When was the decision made to not? Because that one drive they settled for a field goal was early in the third quarter. So I'm assuming he didn't get hurt until after that. And we don't really know what's going on, but that one sounded the most serious of everything out of Tomlin's press conference from the other day, because they were already talking about, well, who kind of fills that position? Who fills that position, Zach? They're talking about even defenders. We saw Sutton Smith was taking those reps as a fullback during training camp, and I'm not sure a linebacker. Who are they going to throw in there? Gilbert, Matakevich? Are they going to do something like that? Or, as Derek said, one of our contributors here on the site, Dan McCullers would be pretty interesting to see as the fullback. Then you would just plug the hole. There would be no hole to run through.
I have flashbacks to whenever the Chiefs did that with Don Terry Poe a couple years back. They lined him up at fullback.
Yeah.
I think it was Jamal Charles at that point. And my Lord, that was just absolutely terrifying if I'm a defender. I think realistically, you're looking at a guy like Jalen Samuels or Tyler Matakevich would be probably your two if you're looking for one offense, one defense, or even putting Vance McDonald or Xavier Grimble back there. I mean, I think that's the most realistic option. I don't see them going with the big, heavy, as exciting as it would be to see Big Dan back there. barreling through people and just having James Conner grab onto the back of his jersey and just run through the daylight. But I think you have a guy like Jalen Samuels who has experience as an H-back and as a fullback at NC State. You have two tight ends where you see a lot of teams don't even carry a fullback, and when they go through with like their standard I formations with two backs, they typically go with a tight end anyway. I think those are going to be your most realistic ones. And if you're just looking for a defender to throw in there, I mean, Tyler Medikevich has the frame to be a stocky, athletic enough guy who's going to get up there and hit somebody and lead the way through there. But he doesn't know the offense and has taken 0 reps at that, and as far as any of us know, at fullback in any of his 4 years with the Steelers. So I think realistically, it's going to be Samuels or one of the two tight ends. I think that's fine, but it's definitely concerning, to say the least, that Nix, even when he was healthy, was not in the game plan. You have a Pro Bowl, All-Pro caliber fullback, already Pro Bowl fullback who's an All-Pro caliber fullback, in my opinion. He's the top 5 fullback, which, there's only about 6 of them in the league at this point, but the top 5 fullback by all things and considering, and he's been a huge part of why the Steelers have had such a great run game with Le'Veon Bell and then James Conner to a point last year. And I think that was kind of one of the things that stood out to me last week about why the Steelers offense struggled to get off the ground is they weren't able to establish a run game. They weren't able to establish a pass game. And quite frankly, I don't know what their identity was that they were trying to go for on Sunday against the Patriots, because they didn't have one. I think until they find that identity, it doesn't matter if Nix is healthy or not. You're not going to be able to establish yourself as an offense if you don't have an identity of any capacity. But losing Nix, who's proven he can more than handle the job, I thought was very puzzling, and I don't know what route they're going to take moving forward to replace him, if they even bother to replace him in the offense, due to the fact that they didn't seem to want to use a fullback last week anyway. So it'll be interesting to see how they cope with this injury moving forward.
Yeah, that's one of, I don't know. I mean, it's tough to say because they didn't use him at all, but we don't know why. And in certain circumstances, would he still go? It wasn't even like really reported after the game. Nobody knew. It was just the mystery of, okay, we have this short yardage situation. Why hasn't Ben sneaking or what? I mean, when you watch the Saints game, I made this comment from Monday night. The Saints go out there and first of all, they got Taysom Hill, which is interesting in and of itself. But I mean, you've got Jared Cook involved. They have a fullback too that gets involved, and multiple running backs, and you see all this stuff, and it's like, wow, hey, look, this is the way the Steelers offense should look. And hopefully, they iron all of these things out and do so quickly. I know a lot of people are down on like the whole wide receiver thing, but I think we need to mention this real quick too, and this is a good spot. And let me see if I still have Bob Labriola's comment still up about Des Bryant. Please, folks, he's 30. He's going to turn 31. And everybody is like saying, this guy was asking, he goes, Instagram's blowing up with people telling him to go to the Steelers. And Labriola just has, ha, 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 ha. I mean, it goes on for like half a line here. No, that's just what this team needs, a 30-something diva receiver with a big social media presence. So we don't need to say anything more than what Lab said here. I mean, that's it.
Sure.
Yeah. I understand Juju Smith-Schuster was limited with a toe. I'm assuming he'll be okay. Sean Davis is back to practicing. I assume he's going to be in the mix, and I think that's one of the bigger key components too, because we'll be talking about Tyler Lockett and playing out of the slot and how they cover that. It may be of more of their advantage, to help Mike Hilton out, not only with Sean Davis in there rather than Cam Kelly, but Cam Kelly is maybe a slot or dime backer role too. But we'll get to that here in a second as well. Speaking of, Joe Hayden also in the secondary now. AC joint, shoulder, did not practice. I'm not hearing how serious this is. It's just what you need is your number one corner to go down. Everyone is going to freak out again. You and I have been okay with Artie Burns through this process, but we were also telling everybody Dante Moncrief will be okay. He laid an egg on last Sunday, so we're hoping, for only the best if Artie Burns ends up having to play, but we'll talk about how they're going to cover in the secondary here. James Conner had an illness as well, but he was limited. Terrell Edmonds shows up limited with a glute. I mean, this is mind-boggling. And then the biggest one, I think, is, Roosevelt Nix was big for whatever reasons, but let's face it, he's a 9 or 10 snap guy at best on the offense. He's more a key special teams cog. Joe Hayden's obviously important, but Marquise Pouncey with the ankle and not practicing and coming out of that game. And poor BJ Finney. I mean, you could sympathize with that, can't you?
As a center, I can, yes.
Oh, that just sucks. He just got the count wrong, didn't he?
It was very painful to watch as a former center, but I know I've been in positions where I've gone there and I've come in and I've had to bump down the center and I missed the snap count and I'm standing there and everyone's around looking at me. It's a very very spotlight, unfortunate position to be in, but unfortunately it happens. And I'm thankful it happened in a game like that where it didn't matter if you did it or not. It wasn't like it was on the game-winning drive. The score was 33-3 at that point in time. It was, if it's going to happen, let it happen then.
Yeah, where you could at least kind of chuckle about it and doesn't make you as frustrated as Boswell trying the Rabona kick or whatever a few years ago and tripping himself. Yeah. So I sympathize with that one especially. But yeah, BJ Finney's capable. Just don't think because he missed one snap count, everybody goes except for him, that he's not capable of filling in for Pouncey. He's not Pouncey, but he is a guy that they've been paying an awful lot of money as a reserve lineman for a while here. And he's been with the team since 2015, so he's not new at this. This isn't his first rodeo. We'll see what ends up happening with Pouncey. That's the one that I'm more or less the most interested in is Pouncey, and then Hayden and Sean Davis. So when you look at all those injuries, you got to assume. I'm going to assume everybody else kind of plays. We really don't know. We'll say Hayden. I'm going to say Davis probably plays. I have no idea with Hayden. They've sat Hayden out when he was. He says he's been ready, and they just paid him a lot of money. I don't think they want him to get worse and then not have him as you continue forward through the season. And, even looking at the schedule, it's like, where can you afford to sit him? Probably here or San Fran. I mean, Cincinnati, Baltimore, Chargers, Dolphins, Colts, Rams. I mean, you need them later in the season. And it's going to be an interesting schedule, to say the least. So, the Seahawks usually, tabbed as run first. Even Russell Wilson throwing for what he threw last year did not throw. He threw for very few yards per pass, and I want to say only like 32 or 3,500 yards. Not like a really big season. He is mobile. He's capable of escaping the pocket, extending plays, things of that nature. Just like I said, like you're used to seeing with Big Ben. I don't think he's necessarily like a run first type guy, though. They don't like to try and put him in danger like a Lamar Jackson up in Baltimore. So, he's going to be there and throw some passes. But again, run first with this group of running backs they have. Chris Carson, he seized the starter's role basically last year when Rashad Penny was kind of banged up. Now you have Penny back. I believe Penny has also leaned down, although I wasn't very impressed. I got to look at Penny's stats from the other day because I wasn't very impressed. 6 for 18, so he was getting about 3 a carry. Carson was 15 for 46, so I guess he was only marginally better, 3-1, but he did have a 21-yard long and a touchdown to add to it. They also have Carson involved in the passing game, which is something they said they were going to focus on this season. He was targeted 7 times, caught 6 of those for 34 yards and another touchdown. The big play guys also, DK Metcalf, it was somebody we were all salivating over at wide receiver, like as far as a physical specimen in the draft. He arrived, he had a very big, grown-ass man play, I believe over B.W. Webb with the Bengals. I think it was over B.W. Webb. If you remember that name, he's been all over the NFL, including the Steelers. Yeah, he's been around for a minute. And then, of course, I mentioned Tyler Lockett, who only had one catch, though. He was only targeted twice, 1 catch for 44 yards, which seems, quite odd. And, he's operating out of the slot quite often. So we're going to see, precisely what ends up going on here. I'm not too worried about, Nick Vannett or Will Disley, the Seahawks tight ends. I don't know the tight end is going to be something they're going to be able to hurt the Steelers necessarily with. The Seahawks are probably looking at that Patriots game and wondering if they could get Chris Carson involved in the passing game, if they could operate Lockett out of the slot or create some mismatches if Joe Hayden isn't there, depending on the safety situation with Sean Davis. I think all of this, though, really, even if you have Artie Burns out there, even if you have Cam Kelly out there, Zach, I think this really all hinges on Mike Hilton right now. In a contract year, he wasn't offered or extended, and he looked kind of exposed as well against the Patriots. even to the point where, we're seeing maybe Cam Sutton on the field a little more. I'm going to assume that Artie Burns would be the guy that would step in and not Sutton or Justin Lane for that matter for an injured Joe Hayden. And I'm sure we'll see or hear more about practice participation as the week goes on here. Maybe even give everybody a quick update on the podcast if we can. But I'm just looking at how they're going to, how they're basically going to cover here. I think one of the big things is they may not have to come out of a lot of like their base or nickel just based on having Mark Barron and Devin Bush.
Yeah, I think the potential corner loss of Hayden is going to be a huge thing because teams, for whatever reason, have had success running against the Steelers on the outside. I mean, you look at their ability. I mean, the Steelers, I thought, did well against the Patriots, run stuffing up the middle. But every time it seemed like they try to bounce it outside the tackle for an outside zone or a counter, they always seem to have some lanes out there. And I think losing Hayden, who isn't the most physical corner, but is more than willing to go in there and put his nose down, I think that's going to be a huge thing because Artie Burns, I think, has done better with that this preseason. But Artie Burns has also had a history of not wanting to be one to throw his nose down there and hit somebody, and especially when you have a physical running back like Chris Carson. He's not a burner. I mean, he is a solidly built dude. I think that's going to potentially get some opportunities for the Seahawks to bounce some plays and see if they can spring one on the outside, especially if the Steelers don't do well with containment, which they have struggled with for whatever reason over the last couple of seasons. But I think the story of this game is going to be their ability to stop the run at all. I mean, Russell Wilson has proven that he can get the job done with his arm. I mean, he's a proven passer. I mean, he was efficient last week. He's always been efficient. I mean, he was 14 of 20 for 196, 134 passing rating. He has the opportunity to get it done through the air. But, I mean, this offensive line, I still don't think is that great of an offensive line. I mean, not having to worry about Tom Cable anymore or whatever his name was, the most lackluster offensive line coach in the league who somehow manages to still be employed, I think is huge for them. But, they're still dealing with some banged up injuries on there. I know Justin Britt didn't practice so far this week. You have Dwayne Brown, who was a full participant, but, and that's a huge move for them. Mike Iupati's still limited. They have holes on that offensive line, who I still believe is not the greatest offensive line on the face of this planet by any means. And Russell Wilson was sacked 4 times last week against the Bengals. And the Bengals have a very good pass rush, but I don't think it's any better than the Steelers. I think the Steelers have an opportunity to bounce back after not getting any pressure on Tom Brady last week. If they can get Russell Wilson flustered back there, make him make some moves on his own and get some coverage breakdowns, and I think if they can stop the run, it's a very winnable game for this defense to have a very nice bounce back performance because they looked good and they looked efficient, and their MO is to run the ball this year on that Seahawks offense. But they didn't do anything to really wow me and say, well, this is going to be the offense that is going to put up 250 rushing yards a game, and if you can hold them to that, you might have a chance to stay with them, but it's not going to be a long shot. I think I wasn't impressed with them last week. Let's just put it that way. I mean, their receiving options are limited. Tyler Lockett may or may not be ready to go for this game. And it leaves you with 2 kind of legit receiving threats in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. And there's a chance that Lockett's not even ready to go for this game since he's still been dealing with a back injury and he hasn't participated yet. I think DK Metcalf is a very polarizing prospect as a guy who runs very fast and is very big in a straight line, but, is still at this point limited as a route runner. He's not incapable. He's just not entirely well-rounded in that capacity yet. I think that's a good opportunity for the Steelers to kind of hunker down and take advantage of a rookie receiver who can cause some mismatches and problems just based on sheer size alone. Or it can turn into another Philip Dorsett situation where you have a very fast receiver streaking down the field with no one covering him because the receivers or the safeties bid on play action. So it could go either way. But I think this is a very good opportunity for the Steelers to kind of get back against a semi-bland offense. I almost want to call it because I don't think the Seahawks are as exotic as they were before. And I think, like I said, that offensive line is still questionable. I think they can cause some headaches up front with Russell Wilson if they come back and kind of put their foot to the gas and get after the quarterback a little more than they did against New England. I think it's a good opportunity for them to bounce back, but I think this is a very winnable offense to get some opportunities against and force some turnovers.
Yeah, and I want to say, too, that the Seahawks, I don't think I expect them to necessarily do any type of hurry-up type stuff. They're not very up tempo in that type of regard, or at least didn't appear to be anyway. Last Sunday against the Bengals, and like I said, as far as their tight end usage or anything like that, it's not a whole lot going on there. Even more or less, you may see 3 wide receivers, maybe about 2/3 of the time or whatever like that, and the rest is kind of, I guess, maybe similar to what you would have seen with the Steelers maybe before they started some of these 4 and 5 wide receiver sets, which kind of gets me over to the other side of the ball here. Is okay, everyone's freaking out about the wide receivers. I think the wide receivers are going to come together quite nicely. I don't think this is the same group, even when we go back to 2016, the team that made the AFC Championship and laid the egg against the Eagles. Marcus Wheaton was lost early, shortly thereafter. It was that Chiefs game. I think that was the last game he ended up playing, and I think he went on injured reserve right after that. He played like 3 games that season, and it was basically Antonio Brown there trying to see what they had with Sammy Coates. They had Kobe Hamilton, I think, originally on the practice squad. He came over from the Panthers at the end of the preseason. DeMarcus Ayers was a 7th-round draft pick. I think I'm missing somebody in this equation too, and I'd have to pull it back up. But you get my drift there. That was back when the AFC Championship had happened. This was one of the things where this moment was too big. It was the Ben Roethlisberger type comment. I don't know that the moment is too big necessarily, and I think there's some people when you're reading or you're hearing all the talking heads, whether it's NFL, ESPN, wherever it is, even the fantasy guys, they're like, the Steelers don't trust James Washington. I don't necessarily know that. If anybody was really paying attention to this game, Ben just wasn't in sync with anyone, including Juju, who is somebody who's always, he has great rapport. I think we have to go back to this, Zach. Training camp, Juju Smith-Schuster. We haven't seen it yet. It's going to pop off the page here very soon, maybe even this weekend, where everyone's going to finally realize everybody's down on him. They're like, oh, he's going to be double teamed. Well, even when Antonio Brown wasn't there, he was still a grown-ass man. And he is like a super grown-ass man the way we saw him performing in training camp. We didn't get to see this materialize as much in preseason because guess what? They didn't play. They didn't play a whole lot. And I think as soon as, that this wheel or this it starts getting motion here, things start to evolve. I think Juju Smith-Schuster is going to be like almost unguardable. You're not going to be able to defend against him, and it's going to open up even more stuff, whether it be Moncrief, and hopefully Moncrief, we don't end up making comparisons with Sammy Coates and not being able to hold on to the ball. Hopefully all those jitters are gone and he doesn't have problems with his hand. And by all means, problems with his hand, I don't want to make excuses, but if he really does have the problems with his hand, he should be like Sammy and sitting on the bench and recuperating, because if you can't catch the ball, if you physically can't catch the ball, if it's not like a mental thing or a mechanics thing and you have a problem with your hand, I really don't want my quarterback, targeting you 10 times when you could be throwing the ball to Vance McDonald or James Conner. And those are the things that I think that are going to be coming in this game, because like we were talking about earlier, they hit John Ross for, I think, a 33-yard touchdown, a 55-yard touchdown. They had a 36 long to their tight end. Is it CJ Uzoma? I'm trying to remember how to say his name. There were long passes everywhere. Gio Bernard broke off a 35-yard little scamper as well. And, Gio had 2 catches for 42 yards. Tyler Boyd had 8 for 60. It's 51 passes from Andy Dalton. Not necessarily what I want to see. I want to see James Conner getting the 18 to 20, rush range, however long, or blah. I can't talk today, man. I need more coffee. But I want to see him. I want to see 18 to 20 attempts, and maybe you throw Connor the ball 3-4 times, or Jalen Samuels. It could be Jalen Samuels or a mix of those. But I need to see more of a variety from the guys coming out of the backfield. I think they can attack with Vance McDonald. I think Vance McDonald needs to be involved. They didn't throw the ball to him until the very last series of the Patriots game. Just totally baffling to me when they had, Van Noy was out, and it's like that wasn't exploited whatsoever. And a lot of times the Patriots weren't even coming out of like a lot of their base defense to cover these 4 and 5 wide, so these mismatches weren't even materializing. And I still think Ryan Switzer has a role too. We don't talk about him much at all, but I think you're going to see. I think we see more balance from the Steelers Offensive line, sans Marquise Pouncey, they should still be solid, a very good group. Finney has been with that group for a long time and has cohesion, so you're not going to really skip a major beat there. What you miss with somebody with Finney as opposed to Pouncey is getting to that second level, pulling and getting up against the linebacker or something like that downfield. And that's going to be hard to do against, I think, the Seahawks defense anyways, because, it's not exactly slouches here. They just picked up Clowney. They're going to have to minimize what he does. You have a number of guys here. Well, Al Woods, people should remember him from the Steelers. He still carved out a niche, and he had an interception last week, which was I saw that, and it just blew my mind. Ziggy Ansah, Michael Kendricks, Bobby Wagner, KJ Wright. I mean, the front seven, they're not bad at all. And then, they cycle in like, Shaq Griffin, too, who's a talented young player. They've got some guys here. There's Shaquem Griffin and then there's Shaquille Griffin. So we have two different Shaq Griffins here. So it's one of these things where, I'm not necessarily sleeping on Seattle's defense. Their secondary, on the other hand, maybe not as strong as they've been in some years. Andy Dalton and the Bengals were picking on Trey Flowers all day long. Not as much on Griffin, and there's Bradley McDougald and Tedrick Thompson as their safeties. We're all worried about what the Steelers are going to do with their secondary, and I'm looking at this. I'm starting to get that vibe of if Ben's on and Ben's Ben and the old gunslinger has it, we always have these early season woes where Ben's making the quips and then all of a sudden he gets out of the doldrums. But if he does that, and I love that word doldrums, I've used it twice today already. If he does that this weekend and they're solid, they're on the same page, this could be a 4 or 5 touchdown type performance from Big Ben too.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think the offense has a lot more to prove this week than the defense does.
Absolutely.
I don't think the defense was by any means perfect last week against the Patriots, but or especially early on in the game, the defense did everything it could to keep that offense in there and keep it. I mean, it was 10-0, it was 17-0 at half. Like, I understand, like that's a big deficit. That's a very good Patriots offense, and you held them to 17. That you expect to get something from your offense to get it going. You couldn't do any of that. I think the offense is much more to prove. Like I said earlier, it was a very bland offensive attack. It was a very questionable offensive attack that didn't really seem to have an identity. This Seahawks front seven, like you said, is a very good front seven. I think they're going to create a lot of problems. I think they're going to be amongst the sack leaders. I mean, Clowney is Clowney. I mean, I think he gets a little bit too overhyped, as we've talked about before. But he's still, in my opinion, a top tier edge rusher for them. And then you still have a bunch of guys. Bobby Wagner, in my opinion, is a top 2 linebacker in the league. Michael Kendricks is no slouch. You have a bunch of guys there that can make a lot of problems for you in that front seven. But that secondary is going to give the Steelers some opportunities to go through and make some impacts and kind of get that confidence and that mojo or even that juju back, if you want to call it that way. And speaking of, I don't think Juju had a bad game. I don't think he made the impact that you would hope from the number one, where he has that big splash play and he's burning guys. But you also need to take into consideration it was the first game of the season against what's arguably the best secondary in the NFL. The Patriots are at no worse, in my opinion, the third best secondary in the NFL. And he was going head-to-head with Stephon Gilmore, who, in my opinion, is a top 3, top 5 cornerback in this league, if not in the argument contention for number one. So this wasn't a slouch performance, and he still was able to go 6 for 78. That wasn't an amazing stat line, but it was enough to at least make his impact known. And I think the fact that he was second on the team in targets behind, for whatever reason, Dante Moncrief, is contrary to popular belief. I don't think he had a great game. I still think that Juju did enough to build off of that performance, and I think he's going to have much better matchups as the year goes along, as he gets back into the niche of being that number one guy, and they kind of move him around from the slot to the outside. I think you're going to see much better days, and I think this is an opportunity for Juju to kind of have and exploit the deficiencies in this secondary. And I also think this is going to be my kind of dark horse candidate. I think Deontay Johnson is going to have a good opportunity to make some noise as well this week as well. I thought it was interesting to see Ben go after him as early and often as he did, considering he's a rookie. You don't see rookies with this type of questions all over the roster getting as much attention, but he had 5 targets, and a lot of those targets came early on in the game while the Steelers were trying to get established. And I think you have an opportunity if the Seahawks continue to send the house and their secondary is a little questionable, I think you could see some chances for Deontay Johnson to get the ball in space and kind of show what made him such a tantalizing prospect for the Steelers with his route running and his shiftiness and in the open field. He could have a deceptively quiet here I am game, and I think he's going to be my dark horse candidate. But I think when you see Juju, James Washington had some vertical opportunities against the Patriots, and Deontay Johnson kind of being in the mix there, regardless of what Moncrief brings with his finger, which I'm hoping – because that finger was grotesque. I mean, you saw the pictures shortly after it happened. It was a very ugly, dislocated finger. If he's not ready, I don't want to see another Sammy Coates situation. So I think you're going to see Juju more involved. You're going to see James Washington more involved. And I think Deontay Johnson has a chance to make more of a name for himself, too. I think that's going to bode well for them this week. But that run game has to be established. James Conner, and it was the reason why it wasn't, as far as I'm concerned, against the Patriots. You get in such a hole so early. They ran the ball in the first half more than they threw, at least in the first quarter and a half. They were running the ball far more. But you get into such a hole, you can't continue to try to run the ball if you're trying to play from a three-score deficit. So, and that's what happened kind of last year towards the end of the season. Whenever James Conner started to become more inefficient, he started losing his mojo. The Steelers were playing from behind in some of those later season games. You had no choice but to throw the ball and air it out because you can't run inside zone when you're down 21 points and expecting anything good to happen with that. So if the Steelers can keep it competitive early, I think they are going to go back to James Conner because this is still a top-tier offensive line. Nothing's changed with or without Marquise Pouncey. You obviously want to have him there. A.J. Finney's been proven to be more than capable of handling the duties of a starter on that offensive line. It's a good opportunity for James Conner and Jalen Samuels to both bounce back. I think Conner did well in the pass game last week, too. I mean, he was 4 for 44 receiving. That's a stat line I think you could see it more often from him this year as Ben continues to dump out, as he continues to develop as more of a receiving option. So I think this is, like I said, this is a very good opportunity for the Steelers offense to bounce back against a defense that is very good up front. But I don't think anything special. It's not the Legion of Boom that it used to be.
Oh, no, not at
all. In the early 10s. So I think this is an opportunity for the Steelers to make some progression with trying to find their identity. And hopefully that involves McDonald. I think it was criminal to have him as uninvolved in that offense. The Patriots, I don't think, were equipped to handle a tight end, especially without Van Noy. You have a guy like Hightower that's pretty much keying off on Conner. You had a lot of opportunities for mismatches to get McDonald involved in there, and he is no matter who he goes against, he's a grown-ass man. He's the perpetual grown-ass man from the SCU contributors. I think it's very easy to see why. He doesn't really get physically outmatched very often. I think he has an equal opportunity to get involved here and to get him in some capacity in run blocking and as a receiving option. But until the Steelers find that identity, I don't think it really matters who they play. They're going to struggle. But I think this is a very key opportunity for them to kind of get something going to see if they can turn the switch and see if they can actually be a highly competent offense that we've seen them be over the last 8 years or so.
Yeah, and I don't want to make it sound like Juju had a bad game. What I'm trying to say is I don't think that anybody noticed that he quietly put up the stat line. And some of that was a little bit of garbage, too, because I don't want to say garbage time. Because James Conner, for a while, it was all going through Conner. They were running the ball the first 3 series or so. They were still finding him in the pass game. And then all of a sudden they just, they abandon it. And, it's the game script. It's getting behind. I think it's some panic. They tried to make adjustments that didn't work. I like when people say, well, they never make adjustments. They never change anything. That's baloney. You know what I mean? But sometimes you make the adjustments, it just doesn't work. I think a lot of it was in their head too. If this is a different opponent, they're not necessarily saying, oh, this is this again. You know what I mean? For the guys that have been there, or they just keep being told how they can't beat the New England Patriots. And that it's, you get told that for so long, you start to believe it yourself. And I think that was something that also I had that gut feeling like in the second quarter of that game. Now you're coming home, and I'm hoping, you're not looking. I hope you're not like overlooking or you're dwelling off of that game and over. I don't think they'll overlook the Seahawks. Hopefully they're ticked off enough, and especially like that. I thought the Antonio Brown stuff would have like lit a fire under them a little more, and there's even more of that where it's just kind of like, okay, that story's dying down a little bit now, isn't it? I'm glad he's not around to be a distraction for them, but they still keep bringing this, crap up. Now maybe it'll stop being a little side story still, and they're trying to drown out all the noise, so to speak, or shut out the noise is their kind of tagline or motto for this season. And I think they'll shut out the noise. I think the noise will be from the fans. I think it'll be nice to be at Heinz Field. Just hopefully, the fans aren't just so disappointed and down. There were boo birds there last year, first quarter of the Kansas City Chiefs game, and rightfully so. They were getting smacked around in the offense, 2, 3 and outs, and then terrible punt coverage, and they got behind again, and then they had to go pass happy and everything, and then they got back into it, and the crowd was back into it. But it's just kind of like one of those things where, hey, we need a little bit of patience here. I don't expect perfection because, again, this is September football. I hate September football anymore. I almost don't want to start watching the NFL until October or mid-October to actually see who some of these teams are. And some of these teams are going to benefit from the other teams or their opponents not finding themselves yet either. And I still think that the Seahawks are kind of in the same spectrum, so to speak. Usually we're talking about the Patriots in that same kind of area too, but they get the Dolphins this weekend and I don't. Even for as much as they've faltered playing down in Miami or playing anywhere in Florida. They're another team like the Steelers. When they go on the road in Florida, they don't usually fare well. This is the Dolphins we're talking about. So, that may not materialize with the Patriots, but it definitely materializes with a few different teams. Packers and Bears kind of stunk up the joint on a Thursday night game a week ago, too. So we'll see how this ends up panning out. Zach, I mean, I don't foresee the Steelers dropping to 0-2 in this game, though.
I don't think they can afford to. I think with the schedule, because I think their early half of the season schedule is much more daunting than the second half.
Oh, yeah.
They can't afford to go 0-2. And I think the Steelers, you don't see them lose, and you can say what you want to say about Mike Tomlin. Very seldom do they go and lose back-to-back games, regardless of the quality of opponent under Mike Tomlin. You don't see it happen as frequently as some fans like to see it. And I think playing at home certainly will help. I think they have a lot to prove. And I still think this is a talented roster. A lot of the big-time media heads are starting to say otherwise and saying that there's average talent. And, you can make the argument that that's the case. I don't think it's average. I think some of it's just unproven. This is still a very talented team. And one thing I wanted to point out here that also quietly happened, Devin Bush had 11 tackles last week.
Yeah.
And you didn't notice it unless you were really paying attention. He was making a lot of good things happen. And I think with this, I meant to say this earlier, with this rush attack with the Seahawks, Devin Bush could be very much into a 10 to 15 tackle game if he's as active as he was last week. So there's a lot of things like that are good to pull from. I think Cam Hayward will bounce back. TJ Watt, if he plays, will bounce back. Terrell Edmonds, if he plays, will bounce back. There's a lot of things that just have bounce back opportunity. And some fans might say that's just Yinzing. I just are being a homer. I just think there's too much talent on this team for it to be a repeat performance. They're not going to win every game this year, but I would highly doubt that they're going to lose. And if they do lose, it'll be in the same fashion they did last week. I just think this is a really good opportunity for them to kind of realize, put the foot on the ground and get a win out of this.
I totally agree. I'm not giving a score. I'm not going out on a limb on this one because
no, I have no idea.
This could be low scoring. This could be high scoring. This could be lopsided. This could be anything. I'm scatterbrained right now, and I also got to see more from the Steelers than I did. Obviously, we saw nothing last week that we could even take positive, other than maybe the Devin Bush deal, to carry forward. So you just got to hope that they're healthy, that they field the best team that they can on Sunday, and potentially maybe they're taking advantage of a West Coast opponent coming, over to the 1 o'clock time zone. And we've seen the Seahawks or some of these teams struggle coming over and doing that before in the past. So I think that's like the one thing that may tip this in their favor for sure. So once again, Zach Meckler, we call him the professor of football because, this guy lives, eats, breathes, and everything else. This is his life. So it has become his nickname because he's the smarty pants of our group. But thanks for joining me once again.
It's always a pleasure, Joe. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to all our listeners out there, thanks for checking out all of our programming this week. We added Terry Fletcher's WTF kind of variety show into the mix, as well as Mike Palaya giving some of his thoughts with his first look from Steel Nation Radio. So check those out. A little bit shorter format than our longer pre and post game stuff that you'll usually hear myself, Zach, and or Brian, depending on who's at the game and who's doing what schedule-wise, but we try and get the post-game out as soon as possible. The pre-game will try and come. I really wish we could have done this one maybe a day later due to the injury report, but scheduling did not allow for that. So look for all of these episodes throughout the week. We appreciate all of our listeners, and thanks for supporting the program. If you don't mind, give us a subscribe, like, or comment where applicable, of course. Don't ever dislike. And, we encourage everyone out there, as always, to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.